Dāmas un kungi.
Ladies and gentlemen, well, I'm happy to welcome you back from the coffee break, and I'm happy that you have returned, and some, or at least our cameraman, have returned, and our viewers, online viewers who are watching our online feed are also with us. I've been invited to moderate the RB rail session. I'm very happy to return to the FICIL family after a number of years as well. So I think that the overriding theme of today is about the future. We're celebrating the 20th anniversary or 20 years of FICIL, and today, in fact, we are going to talk, as I already mentioned, about the future of transport sector in 2030. Just think to yourself how old you will be in 2039 and what the transport sector might look like. Well, we have a number of transport sector experts who are shaping the future of transport sector. To me, transport infrastructure is the blood system of any nation, of any country or the economy, and it is also a major element of the global connectivity. What I have understood is that what makes countries successful is the ability to have a strategic outlook for the transport sector and are able to chart a clear roadmap for getting where they want and having the industry with sufficient professional knowledge and skills and well-governed transport enterprises and system. And what makes a country successful is ability to draft or stick to strategies irrespective of political change. And I could mention Switzerland, Sweden and Finland as probably the best examples of such countries. And everyone's talking about disruption, digital disruption, economic disruption, and disruption is mentioned all over the place, and disruption is also happening in a sector such as transport, which is sort of traditionally a slower changing sector, which is also thinking and talking about disruption. And we have Elon Musk as one of the visionaries or champions of the transport disruption, who's the father of e-cars, and he is also the father of Hyperloop. Decide for yourself how valuable Hyperloop is. But nevertheless, these are innovations that are challenging the existing paradigms, transport sector paradigms. And there's an interesting example from the neighborhood, Peter Westerwacker from one of our neighboring countries, who made a very good profit by creating Angry Birds, the game. Even Angry Birds can give you millions of profit, and he now thinks that he could privately finance a tunnel between Helsinki and Tallinn and put the railway or trains under the sea. And it is a technology guy who's challenging actually the traditional transport paradigms and understanding of transport, and is also presenting unorthodox approaches to transport innovation. And RB Rail should also become such a disruption in the transport sector, because it will integrate road transport, railway transport, ports, airports, innovation, logistics, and investors, both private or institutional and public investors. I think that the implementation of this project will be a true test of the ability of Latvia and the Baltic region, the region's ability to cooperate regionally, plan together, and govern together and manage together this project, at least according to minimum OECD standards. Will Latvia be able to address these issues efficiently? Well, we'll see whether we'll be able to attract the investors, not only for technical and designing stages, or in the technical and designing stages, but also for the or in the operational stage. with technologies and with digital solutions and so forth. Mr. Sauka, at the end of the previous discussion, posed a very interesting question about the education strategy, whether the public sector has sufficient capacity and the ability to implement any change or disruption. And here's a rhetorical question for you in the transport sector as well. Does it have the capability and the ability? FICIL is urging the Latvian government to focus on sustainable mobility as one of the growth drivers and a factor contributing to a predictability, territorial cohesion, openness of the Latvian network. And this is a quote from FICIL documents. And this is something that we are going to discuss with our panelists. We have excellent panelists for you today. Tāls Linkaitis, Minister for Transport of the Republic of Latvia, who will specifically talk about road transportation. As regards to the ports, Ansis Zeldiņš, the CEO of the Freeport of Riga Authority, will talk about the ports. Kaspars Briškens, head of business development of RB Rail, will talk about the RB Rail project. Last but not least, Arturs Kokars, CEO of Aviation Association of Latvia, will give us the aviation sector perspective. And I should also underline that Mr. Briškens is on the board of Rail Baltic, and both aviators or aviation experts were also on the board. Here's how it goes. Here are the rules of the game. You cannot use one of the key arguments of not having enough money in this discussion. Anyone who mentions that there's not enough money will be expelled immediately. You will be given 5 minutes for your introductory remarks, and through my political career, I have learned that everyone should stick within their time slot, and if you run out of your time, I will just stop you, and at the end I'll ask each of you to give us closing remarks and a summary of what has been heard, and give us 2 specific initiatives or 2 things that you could do based on the discussion. So without further ado, I will give the floor now to Tāls Linkaitis, who will talk about the roads or road transport. Hello everyone, happy to see so many familiar faces here. We have met with you regularly to discuss various issues, so very happy to see you again. Before we go into road transportation, I would like to briefly make general comments about transport sector and the main challenges faced by the sector today, and let me use some key words. Transparency is first, transparency for the whole sector, transparency of the industry players, transparency of decision-making, transparency of the business operations, transparency of procedures, processes, and another key word is the accountability or the responsibility. So accountability towards society, accountability towards regulators or supervising bodies, responsible bodies, whether there's feedback and whether people and responsible authorities understand what's being achieved, what sort of targets are being set, and whether they can assess or evaluate or see the performance, including the performance of the managers. The next keyword when it comes to transport sector is efficiency. Are we cost efficient? Are we efficient or productive from a human resources point of view? Is there enough added value generated by the sector? And there's a lot of room for improvement when it comes to the efficiency, because efficiency is inextricably linked with export potential. There are subsectors in the transport industry that are not really export-oriented or have probably not considered exporting enough as a possibility. We will announce a tender for public transport services quite soon. If you take the public transport operators, compared to our neighboring countries, we mostly have medium and small size enterprises that don't have the export potential, are unable to penetrate other export markets or exploit the available market opportunities. If you compare it with the trends in the European market, you can see that if in 5-10 years, if we are not operating internationally, then our neighboring countries and operators from our neighboring countries will take over our market, in fact, and will probably squeeze us out of it. That's why the next keyword is the openness. Openness of our market. Regulated markets are being opened for competition today, and I'm in particular talking about public transport, railroads. I'm talking about road management and maintenance, rather, which will also be opened to competition soon. And openness to new ideas, openness to new approaches, openness to new perspectives, openness to new technologies, connectivity. If you take transport infrastructure, transport networks, we need to have external connectivity with the rest of Europe, and RB Rail or Rail Baltica in this regard will be our main asset or main connection or infrastructure project that will help us boost our connectivity and help us integrate within the overall trans-European networks, and also the internal connectivity between the countryside and the cities, or, the daily commute between various regions of our country, which requires a lot of improvement. And the last keyword is integration of various technologies, or cross-compatibility and interoperability of the various modes of transport. Railways not operating in isolation from aviation, or ports, or buses. All of that is all of these elements are part of a bigger picture, of an integrated picture. When it comes to public transport, we are hoping that starting from 2021, we will have finally single, public transport tickets. So if you want to get from point A to point B using various modes of transport, you could buy one ticket for the whole journey. And yes, I cannot use or have to avoid the key word of not having enough money, but your 5 minutes are out already, but I'll give you another 5 minutes for not using this, bad phrase. And when it comes to roads and the money, I would like to rather keep my mouth shut because I'm not allowed to use this keyword. But we are very much quality focused. We are very much looking at new ways of financing models like PPP, but there's nothing else that I could add here from the financial perspective.
Oh, thank you. Mr. Zeltiņš, ports, Free Port of Riga. Good afternoon. I'm happy to see all of you here. Actually, I'm very honored to be in this audience. I have the honor to represent the Free Port of Riga, but historically in my career I have been basically linked only to maritime sector, and the port in a way is the place where one form of transport moves to another, land to sea, and so this is really linked to ships. Now, if we speak about the future, but now I will start differently. About ports in Latvia, and here I'm not speaking solely about Riga. Definitely the historical background that we have and also the approach that we have seen has been rather negative. There are numerous reasons for that. Also because ports as such, as entities, have been rather closed in their businesses. And if we look at society, what was going on within the ports, also the companies and also the management of ports, it always has been somewhere on the other side of the fence, and society shouldn't know too much about it. I believe this is one fundamental thing that needs to be changed, and we are changing it. And it's not only a matter of Latvia, it's in general relevant throughout Europe. And here I support what was said by Mr. Minister, that port and maritime transport cannot exist as a standalone business. If we look at the future prospects, it should be integrated into the general system of transport with passengers and cargoes. Of course, each country has a slightly different profile, but inevitably this is a path that we have to take. Another element, again, with respect to ports and the development of ports, we have to really speak about innovations and efficiency. Often we have been speaking only about volumes and tons and cargoes and the amount of cargoes. If you have lots of cargoes, that's good. Less, then it is worse, and so on. Of course, this is the core activities of the ports, but if we look into the future, we will also have to speak about innovations and efficiency. These will make a port competitive in the future. And now about the Baltic region. The Baltic region is rather saturated with ports. If we would take a look at the coastline, we have larger and smaller ports almost per each 100 kilometers or couple of 100 kilometers. So this means that we are operating in a rather dynamic competition. We are tied to our geographical location. We cannot move away and find a better geographically place. So we have to be able to use as efficiently as possible the positive capacities and strong points that we have. And here Latvia and Latvia's transport system and the ports do have such strong points and capacities. If we look historically and with hindsight, we see that the ports of Latvia are not engaged in some kind of negative competition that cargoes are leaving Latvia. We do compete, but we also cooperate, and this cooperation is aimed at each port really using its strong points. The transport corridor and what defines the operation of ports in the Baltic region is quite homogeneous. If we look at our neighbors, the Lithuanians, and I'm not speaking about Russia at this point because this whole sector in Russia is politically regulated. But if we look at Estonians, Latvians, Lithuanians, and also Finns and Poles to a certain extent, we compete, and we all compete in one rather united, integrated transport corridor, east to west, west to east. And definitely all these players will try to use their strong points. They will try to reorient themselves and attract cargo operators and cargo flows through their ports. And of course, ports cannot exist in isolation. Some ports with transshipment exist like this, but well, the coastal companies are not that important. Madam Chair, I understood the signal. Well, we do have such ports in the world, but they are not prevalent in the Baltic region. So it means that these cargoes come over the rail and then leave through the ports. So it's very important when planning, and also when planning the development of ports and the transport system, this whole system should be planned as one united body, as organism. And we should look in general at transport corridors. Port cannot exist without rail, without roads, and also to a large extent the development of port will be defined by smart and wise and active and logical development projects. And the way we implement those road development projects, it's clear that we have the rail, and the railway is a really long-term decision. If we draw a railway line on the map, that's for the coming 100 years. So when this kind of decision is adopted, we really should take the perspective of a century. And we have to learn how to do this. And we should take this into account when planning port and infrastructure projects. Now we move from water into the sky. And I give the floor now to Mr. Artūrs Kokars, who is the Director of Aviation Association of Latvia. Mr. Minister, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very happy and I'm honored to talk to this esteemed audience and briefly about aviation. We are speaking today about infrastructure, and I would like to begin with this. A tiny example. Liepāja airport, 10 million euros were allocated to it. And currently we have regular flights to this airport, and the company has taken the decision to invest 20 million in pilot academy in Liepāja. Airfield. The question is, was the municipality will see returns of investments? We don't know, but we know that all those businesses and all those development projects that have developed around the airfield, this is what drives the growth and the development for Liepāja Airport, and also for the municipality, and it's also good for the mobility inside Latvia. Aviation currently in Latvia has major ambitious investment projects, development projects, Destination 2025 of Air Baltic, which is a very ambitious plan and linked to great challenges. And the sixth phase of the airport, construction of the terminal and Rail Baltic project, which will really take Riga Airport into another dimension. And the image of Riga Airport will change beyond recognition, and the change will be for the good. And so our opinion of our association is that we should not be afraid, even if these projects get delayed, if there are some problems in implementation. The most important thing is not to change the strategic decisions on implementation of these projects. These are the risks. We have had such examples previously in the past that within 1 year, 2 strategic plans change in the airport from 30 to 10 to 5 millions. That's a major risk, and then nothing really happens. People don't understand what should be done in a situation like that. The next challenge, again, in infrastructure is that we also hear that in the public space, that the European money or cohesion funds will be on the decrease, and that we have the challenge of finding other sources of investment. Would it be public-private partnership or private investment? And this is possible only if the basic infrastructure in the airport develops. Airside has been completed. That's the part that the air companies see. But we still have to think about providing services to passengers in public space. Like in the previous session, Havok representative spoke about the luggage problems. Well, in general, infrastructure that we have. That's construction, that's material, but human beings are behind all this. And the risk that we have to manage now and work very seriously with, this is our young people, young generation. Aviation sector has developed in the recent years without major upheavals, and we really feel lack of human resources. And this is the question of what kind of people we receive as graduates from our institutions of education, what kind of recruits we have on all our levels, basic level up to pilots, up to high, and here we have to speak about academic education and the allocation of state-funded study places, which are allocated not on the basis of a competition. Universities are not competing for these resources. They lack incentives for development. They are not developing their products. And also the vocational education. Vocational education is the tool, and these institutions are ready to offer good service and also license. first from Civil Aviation Agency. And when here we have if the young person does not receive the license, then the institution is not paid for. But if someone wants to get to become a pilot, then your young boy or girl has to collect at least 70,000 euros to pay for these studies. Air Baltics is trying to solve the problem also by freezing its own resources, but the state really should help the sector.
Yes.
Thank you. Let me insert a short advertisement regarding airports. If you don't stay late at the FICIL reception, there's going to be a dresses program on the national television. It is moderated by Mr. Tibilts, and together with him we have walked through the Tukums airport, which people don't usually sort of have the opportunity to see from the inside. Now, as regards to the railway and prospects for the railway sector, Kaspars Briškens, Head of Business Development for RB Rail. Hello everyone again, very happy to see so many familiar faces, people who've been involved in Rail Baltica project and come from transport sector. I've had the pleasure over the years of cooperating with many of you, and would like to thank the FICIL for hosting this discussion, and they are not only supporting various changes in the transport sector, but are also supporting the Rail Baltica project. And I'm happy to be back at the SSC Stockholm School of Economics. So I'm going to talk about the logistics and mobility challenges from the Rail Baltica perspective, and talk about three future visions. Challenge number one: Baltic countries, including Latvia, are facing an acute lack of understanding or about the importance of the transport for the economy, or the railway for the or connectivity for the economy. It's not only about railway Baltica or Rail Baltica. Is it just an infrastructure project, or is that a corridor, a cargo corridor and connection to Western Europe? And an interesting statistic for you: within 4 hours you can reach around 0.4% of the European GDP. We have 2% of GDP in the 8-hour radius of Riga, which shows that we are a periphery country, and that again underlines the importance of various transport connections, including air connections, air transport, and potential Rail Baltica project. And I will try to avoid the taboo keyword, but my favorite example in this regard is Finland. Finland is a rich country. It has a wonderful infrastructure, but they have a wonderful infrastructure not because they are rich, but because they have a good infrastructure. But they are rich because they have interesting, or rather good infrastructure. And I don't think that the Baltic countries get this connection or this link. Intermobility or multimodal transportation is something that is again neglected by the Baltic countries. Multimodality is not something that we are focusing on. Yes, when it comes to railway, it is very much connected to the port, and all those corridors have capacity to put through certain volumes of cargo. So there are synergies between the railway and the ports. Of course, the question is how well it is integrated in other multimodal chains and networks. So in case of Rail Baltica, we must ensure that Rail Baltica is fully integrated in the existing transport network, and it is integrated in a broader transport system with railway stations, ports, airports. Riga Freeport has a huge potential, especially considering the Rail Baltica as well. So we could eliminate different bottlenecks. Currently, we are not really connected to the Riga Freeport, but that's something that should be worked on. And Mr. Minister mentioned corporate governance, institutional governance is an importance of governance in general is very interesting. So Rail Baltic is an interesting joint venture as well. We could write a whole book about how interesting it was to govern such a multinational cross-border joint venture, and Madame Rubesa is an expert on that, by the way, as the former CEO of the Rail Baltica. So there's an interesting aspect to the infrastructure governance. We, as a joint venture, which is sort of neutral to the discussion on the governance of the infrastructure, are being regularly attacked by various project partners, the future, your potential users and the investors, about not engaging all the stakeholders in the debate or the discussion, that decisions are made behind closed doors and not all of the users or clients are being fully involved. Now, three visions. What I see, and actually, transport sector here in Latvia is headed towards those visions or those goals. Transport, the decline of the transport mentality. For years we'd been oriented on low-value transit operation, which has received a lot of EU public investment. It has been mostly focused on volumes, or stuck on volumes. 60 million tons have annually been shipped through our transit system, either dry or liquid cargo from Russia, which makes the profit of roughly 15 euros per 1 ton, which is very, very small value added. Also, from the perspective of Rail Baltica, what we are striving for is for higher value added, as in countries that are higher on the logistics transport index, like Finland, for example, and we should create the logistics systems that are allowing us to use the full potential of our infrastructure and allow us to integrate into the international supply chains or value chains. But we need a shift of paradigm in this respect. We need to change our mindset. Hopefully Rail Baltica will help us change it. And third vision, innovation and digitalization or digital transformation. We're a wonderful platform, stakeholders. We're integrating stakeholders, startups, local startups, local universities, Scandinavian universities will have the infrastructure which will match the expectations of the 21st century. We'll have smart governance models. Sometimes it is difficult to actually translate for myself, from English into Latvian, because those terms are developing very rapidly in English. Nevertheless, the so-called condition-based maintenance is also very important for all the subsectors of the transport sector, both the railway maintenance, road maintenance, aviation or plane maintenance, and so on and so forth. Smart services, not only for the clients, but also cargo services, smart cargo services. So it's all about automation, digital declarations, traceability, blockchains, big data, and all the services derived from that. That's the long-term vision. A lot is happening already today, but Rail Baltica is trying to keep ahead of the curve, if you will. And another vision, a very rapidly developing concept when it comes to passenger and cargo transportation, mobility as a service. Again, I have to mention Finland, which is one of the the icebreakers, if you will, or champions when it comes to integrated, uninterrupted, multimodal supply chain solutions, including solutions for passengers. And this is my last statement when it comes to Rail Baltica. Let's see how code sharing between Rail Baltica and fast speed train will develop. Single ticket for passengers, for luggage, synchronized times, departure and arrival times, so that you can get from A to B in the most efficient and digitalized way, smart way. So before I open the floor for your questions, and before you join the discussion, I have two questions that I would like to address to all of the panelists, apart from Mr. Briškens. First of all, from your sector's perspective, what would be the role of your sector in the Baltic region or Baltic Sea region? What sets the Latvian sector apart from other countries? What makes it unique? And what can you do to protect your investors, your sector better, and how to attract more investors or suppliers to your sectors? And we'll start with ports, Mr. Zeltic. Well, because the first question is a rather complicated question, it's a tricky question. As I already mentioned, when it comes to ports, we can't really change our geographical location. That's what we have. All ports have their pros and cons, or their strengths and weaknesses based on geographical location. On the other hand, Mr. Brishkins mentioned about the decline of transit industry, but we have to work with whatever we have, and we have to, work with whatever we have to build something that we don't have. And I agree with, in this regard, with Mr. Brishkins, and we have to work with whatever we have to achieve something that we want, but we still have those transit flows, those transit cargoes, and in the coming decades, I don't think that those transit flows will disappear, or there's going to be any major change with regard to those flows. But we need to build, create, and develop value-added services. Is there anything unique in Latvia that sets it apart from other countries? Well, from a Baltic Sea region perspective, our uniqueness is in our proximity to eastern countries compared to Sweden. Sweden is, a big market which is quite close to us, and we're close to the huge eastern market. And now about the investors. Well, as regards the investors, what we want and what we are planning to do, or what we've realized, is that ports and port authorities have to become much more active and create close partnerships with all potential investors that would be willing to use our infrastructure. Current geopolitical context and market globalization means that by having a location somewhere, by having an infrastructure somewhere in the world, does not necessarily mean that investors will come to you and knock on your door. You, as the infrastructure manager, have to be willing to expose yourself to risks, and you have to be willing to get engaged, strike partnerships, and do whatever you can to help project owners implement their projects as successfully and profitably as possible. Just out of curiosity, in the last 5 years, have there been any new investors in the Riga Freeport? Well, in the last Freeports, no matter how surprising this may sound, in the last 5 years, we've implemented, I think, 3 or 4 new terminal projects or stevedoring projects. Where do the investors come from? Locals, Japanese, and Russian, of course. Thank you. I hope that this is neither the beginning nor the end. I think that this is a sort of a new phase of faster development. What about the aviation, Mr. Kokars? Well, when it comes to aviation sector, our pride and joy is that we are a regional hub, we're a regional leader, we have the connectivity envied by our neighboring countries. And that, of course, is a certain sort of burden and challenge. Currently, we're in a position which allows us to dream big and even, think about becoming a leader of the Nordic market, and Rail Baltic and the 6th phase of terminal expansion are good preconditions for us to meeting this goal and making this ambition come true. That would give us an additional connectivity, additional destinations. What we still have to agree on or debate is how to make sure that we have more and more long-distance flights from Latvia. This is what probably makes us unique compared to our neighbors or our competition. As regards to investments or investors, one of the future challenges that we are already addressing is not only the expansion of the airport that I already mentioned, but also the development of the land lots around the airport, the so-called airport city concept and cargo city concept that we are very much focused on currently. We know the rough estimates, or we know what the Rail Baltic will look like. We know what the capacities will be, which allows us to proceed with these two concepts with the greatest certainty, and we will attract private investment in particular. So airports are not going to invest in, say, hotels. We're not going to invest in conference center, in office buildings, manufacturing, processing, logistics centers, or capacities that will be developed around the airport, not inside the airport. And we have to now think about the synergies that will give us higher added value. Now, about the sector as such, in our industry, 5 companies contribute to 76% of the whole industry output: the Air Baltic, Rafavia, Smartlinks, and other companies, which is not easy, which means that the remaining 24% have a huge growth potential. And I'd like to specifically underline that we should promote those companies in order to promote the overall development of the sector. Mr. Linkaitis, Mr. Minister, what do you think about development? So what is our competitive edge compared to other neighbors? Well, let me address it from the other end, or let me turn it upside down. We would be happy if we would not be different from other Baltic Sea region countries, if we would be the same in terms of values, the same in terms of business practices, decision making, red tape reduction, and so on and so forth. What sets us apart, or what makes us unique, is the size of our country. We're a small country, so decisions can be taken faster, so all these hierarchical systems have less impact on our decision making. We're trying to make sure that all the administrative procedures are as simple and easy as possible, and e-governance is used as much as possible instead of us carrying those papers around various institutions. We have to be investor-friendly country. We have to have clear rules of the game. Equal treatment is absolute necessity. Considering the past experiences, we should be more flexible. We have to be able to adjust more quickly and probably transfer all the best practices from our neighboring countries. That is what would give us competitive edge. Well, you've worked in the region for many years. What would be the best practices that we should try to follow? Well, let me put it in a very diplomatic way. Every country has its strengths, and I don't want to really sort of single out any one country, but Nordic countries in terms of professional ethics and business practices is the standard that we would like to integrate in our practices. Unfortunately, those behind the cameras or those watching us online live stream will not be able to ask questions, but we now open the floor for questions. Would there be anyone willing to kick off the Q&A session? And please introduce yourself so that everyone who's watching us would know who you are. My name is Arnis Karkos from the FICIL Transport Working Group. I'm the chair of the FICIL Transport Working Group. Just briefly, what our working group, what our position paper contains, position paper that we're going to submit to the Cabinet of Ministers. The key emphasis is going to be on the investors and the role of the investors in promoting the transport, fostering transport sector, how to make investment climate more favorable to the existing investors, and secondly, how to attract or lure in new investors and bring them or make the investment land here in Latvia. Now, as regards to the first kind of investment or investment climate for the existing or investment conditions for the existing investors, those are sort of recurrent issues regarding efficient and open governance models, infrastructure improvements, and the reduction of the grey economy. Undoubtedly, nobody questions that. But this year we also added or shifted the focus to also attracting investment, and we mentioned 4 specific activities that the government should implement and should focus on, first of all, efforts, sector-specific efforts for attracting new investors to airports and road construction, reconstruction projects. And I'll have a question about this, by the way, in a minute. Second activity or second strand is marketing or promoting our country in a multimodal world, in a global world, and how to better position ourselves for the investment, how to best make use of the newest technologies, having a game changer projects, game changer environments, how to promote the R&D culture much more aggressively is in the transport sector, in particular through our universities, through our scholars, researchers and industry leaders and industry players that are active here in Latvia, so that we could have a sort of a leapfrog effect and so that we could innovate much more actively.
And number 4 was how to get this sector to look at and to consider military mobility, which is a very important matter in the current environment. You had a number of questions. Let's now give a pause and give a possibility to answer to our panelists. Anyone wishing to respond? Actually, I'm looking at Mr. Linkaitis primarily. Well, Mr. Zeltiņš is getting ready. I understand that there was a 4th question. Perhaps we should allow also Mr. Kaklos to give this 4th question. Well, I'm asking one question, but I'm addressing it to 2 persons. Multimodality has always... It's always important to understand the other sector, not your own one, this connectivity. I would like to focus upon roads and ports because I personally hear a lot in rail and that in railways and airports. They are paying attention to proactive and innovative approach because there's European money and also because of our geographical location. But as regards ports and roads, I'm not seeing this to the same extent. That's why I'm not asking this question to the specialists of ports and roads. But not specialists to ports and roads. So, Mr. Kokars, what should be done in roads and ports to attract investors who need this infrastructure? Well, I'm going to abstain from comments because as regards seaports and roads, I'm not an expert. But I can just guess that no one has abolished the principle of egg and chicken and egg. And also, if there are no roads, no one is walking along them. But you always have to have some kind of business logics behind it. And in our case, aviation, railroad and airport, we see the logics in it. To put it perhaps in a rather simple way, we are actually expanding our zone of influence. We are getting new passengers then from Estonia and Lithuania. Already now we have a better offer in aviation, and that could really take us one step ahead. And that would, well, you see, if you have demands, then the roads have to be built. And I'm not mentioning that taboo topic. Now, you can mention money, but you shouldn't say we don't have the money, there's lack of money. You have to offer a solution. Well, speaking as a private person, I must say that we have been sitting like drug addicts on this free money, and when investors have been. When we were speaking with investors in Baltic Cup, they say that the catalyst will be the public-private partnership project. If it is implemented successfully, then this will probably be the way forward. And also the business in the framework of state procurement, public procurement, will find some ways how to build excellent infrastructure with private resources. Yeah, you can talk about money in this way, indeed. Now about ports. Mr. Brikšens, what would be the game changer or the key element that could allow Mr. Zeltiņš to attract more investors to ports. Well, thank you. Again, let's take the principle of multimodality. Ports are no longer just locations on the water, loading and unloading cargoes. We don't have to look at Rotterdam or even China ports. These are industrial zones where all kinds of transportation modalities meet. I really like this example. It's a Malmö port. In 2008, they didn't have a single new car from the logistics point of view. And they employed the person who had worked for a long time in Toyota logistics and were using the contacts and the professionalism of this person and all the support granted by Malmö municipality. They managed to attract Toyota. 200, 300 cars. Then other Japanese came, the critical mass formed, then the Germans came, then the Italians. And in the peak hour in 2012, they had those thousands of new cars, and these cars were not only reloaded to provide for the North European market, but all possible value-added services were provided, preparing the car for the market, installing audio equipment, customized audio equipment, excellent, clean workplaces with huge added value. And so this logistics component was only part of it. And this is a philosophy that we should apply also to the development of Baltic ports. In rail, Baltic Rail, MIDA and POX Euros will be very important in Estonia. And again, I want to return back to this transit mentality. I'm not saying that we should not provide services to cargoes, even if they have low added value. We have to work with them, but we have to get rid of this mentality. Transit is just like a wind going through the room. We are trying less resistance so that we would have maximum capacity, maximum quantity, and we just want to get through this wind, through Latvia, through the infrastructure, large volume of cargoes, and we have very low added value. However, if we look at ports as hub of critical mass where we produce added value, if we look at it from the point of view of philosophy of management of supply chains, then we could replace this metaphor of wind with a metaphor of windmill. And here would have this multiplicator, industrialization, and we will no longer have 15 euros per ton, but hundreds. Especially we get these in containers. If we start opening the containers, we have some kind of added value. Logistics, like we see that also in Estonia, all the cargoes going to Russia. So this is a vision for the future. Very briefly, how to promote and how to sell yourself. Actually, the Ministry of Transport has done a lot with the development of the brand via Latvia, and Riga Airport has joined it, and we have been in a number of international fairs with joint stands, also uniting this. And this brand should be developed, and this is the way how to promote yourself and how to sell Latvia as a country of one logistics, where you have ports and airports, rail, and logistics companies sitting at the same table. So I would like to see also Latvia's past Latvian Post in the same company, and this definitely should be supported. Mr. Linkaitis, any comments on this, about this whole range of issues? I believe that this approach is very good, that you are asking, commenting on the strong or weak points of another sector. Perhaps we could repeat the same in public administration, to the same kind of rotation principle, to rotate perhaps Mr. Kokars to the port and to see what happens, what can we get out of this. But seriously speaking, if we look at the roads in this sector, And I'm not mentioning the words that I was not allowed to mention. In these conditions, it's important to look at the priorities and to understand that those main regional roads are important for us, and we should ensure connectivity and good quality roads where we have economic growth and potential. And this way we should allocate state resources, allocate and reallocate. And of course private-public partnership would allow us to get additional resources for this. For these parts of roads with more intense transport traffic. So let's see if we succeed with Čekava circular roads, then we could move on to Riga and to Bauska circular roads. Now about ports, I can agree to what was said, that we should be striving for greater added value. Also, we should look at the way land is used. We need more transparency, efficient use of resources. And one example, the port of Liepāja. I was told that even the last intermediary has vanished from Liepāja port. So only those who are really doing something, the owners are operating there, both the producers and those who are handling cargoes. So I believe also that our major ports should be striving for this. The next question, Mr. Rockens, former Air Rail board member. Partly the question put by Mr. Kok was answered by Mr. Briškars, but my question would be addressed to Mr. Zeltiņš. You mentioned 10 years. I would like to challenge this period. Let's look at the recent ice hockey championship. The Finnish team came with a radically new team. It was trained in a very short time, and they got the gold medal. 10 years in contemporary society, this seems to be a very long period of time. So what should the free port of Riga look like in 5 years' time?
Thank you, and I've made public statements about this, or I have announced this publicly. We are very closely cooperating with the Port of Rotterdam, and Mr. Briškens already talked about the Port of Rotterdam in terms of port management. Port of Rotterdam, and not only the port management but port development, it is probably the golden standard again. It is not only the biggest port in the world, but also in terms of how rational approach can greatly benefit a country which is in terms of territory 3 times smaller than Latvia. And what concerns Riga Freeport, I would like to reference what Mr. Linkaitis said. What we would like to achieve in 5 years is to be much more focused in what we do. And I have mentioned this publicly. I mean, what we are seeing today is that, having a territory or having a landlord, be it, in the port, in the country, or in the municipality, is not enough anymore. So the question is, what can you do with that land, or what kind of intended use do you have for that land? The Latvian ports have the problem of trying to do everything at the same time, or scattering their attention all over the place. We have too many roads, although some might say that's not true, but we have the ports that are trying to do everything. And so not only in 5-year perspective, but actually even sooner, we are trying to sort of focus core activities of the port on as few things as possible, and we will leave the rest for probably later or for specific projects. In other words, we will implement a targeted investment program, and we'll try to focus on specific projects, not just invest everywhere on everything that is within the area of the port, no matter whether it is in the center of the port area or elsewhere. Of course, as a port, we also have a public or social responsibility or function, and we can not only think about the business and probably spoil the places or areas where nothing should be built, because we are, part of the city, part of the communities, part of the various neighborhoods, and what we need to now focus is really on our core activities that are really, at the center of the port, from a location point of view. And yes, what concerns port infrastructure, we're going to innovate. So what concerns 10 years, this is more about cargoes and the transit cargoes. So we hope that without any geopolitical turbulences, the throughput capacities should not go down, or volumes that we put through our port should not go down. So in 10 years, those transit cargo volumes should remain the same, so the transit routes should be as efficient as they are, or as loaded as now. And Mr. Briskets mentioned the windmill. We would like to really let this wind blow into the windmill and create additional value. So in 10 years, we hope that the Rail Baltica will be built, at least that's what we hope for. So what will be the connection, or what will be the sort of the link-up between the port and the railroad, and what about Malmö and Scandinavia, and Rail Baltic to Malmö? Malmö? Well, I'm rather skeptical about this. As far as Riga is concerned, and from cargo-wise, I don't see any strong synergies with Rail Baltic. Probably, from an industrial park point of view, from the industry development point of view, yes, there's a straight synergy, but it will not increase our cargo volumes, our throughput volumes. I'm very skeptical about RLB contributing to bigger volumes. But there is a strong synergy with Rail Baltic and with the airport for cruise passengers. This is an interesting element, or an interesting sort of node. And we have very good potential, to provide multimodal sort of connection for those who are getting either on or off a cruise ship. So those who are coming or going from a cruise ship or journey and using the hotels and transport. But we have to do our homework to be prepared for those passengers. As regards to the airport, we need to have long-distance flights, transcontinental flights, and we need to have a proper railway connection to the airport for the passengers, and we need to have a better passenger terminal at the port for the ship passengers as well. Do we have any other questions from the floor? Yes, a lady at the back of the room. And please do introduce yourself. Edith Karninja is my name, and my remark is as follows. I would like to see FICIL celebrating 20th anniversary with more women managers in the transport sector on the boards, managerial executive boards, and so on and so forth. And also I would like to see more women among the pilots of Air Baltic. This is also sort of links with what is happening in the labor market, and I'm following the Air Baltic Academy, what is it doing, and I'm constantly asking them, where are the women, where are the girls? Because on average only one out of 10 ladies that goes through the academy ends up working as a pilot, really. So what is your vision for more sort of women engagement or female empowerment in transport sector, how to sort of empower women and how to open them doors to managerial positions and seats and positions and pilot positions, any kind of internships, any kind of grants, probably Freeport Authority, for example, might have a grant sort of program for women. Well, let me respond very quickly. As far as the Freeport Authority is concerned, the gender balance is above average, above sort of corporate average, if you will. So the gender structure is 40% women, 60% men. And if you take the port in general, there are different kinds of stevedoring at other companies. It is mostly industry related and companies that are working with involved machinery. So it's been traditionally a sort of male-dominated sector or industry. As regards the transport sector, is very much open to women, and in particular when it comes to sailors, we now have first female captains or female masters, and first mates. Well, that depends on the willingness of women to go into that kind of education and work in that kind of sector. Mr. Linkites, what do you think about gender equality? Well, some 3-4 years ago, I visited the so-called TNT days, so one of the major EU events focusing on transport sector. Before that, I was mostly involved in project management, and when it comes to different projects, gender equality is not really an issue there. But when I visited TNT event, I saw that some 90% of people are men, or participants are male. So unfortunately, that is a sort of a traditional way that the industry has developed, and that such a gender balance or gender proportion or ratio may change only if we encourage the youngsters or ladies to join the sector and the industry and go into that kind of education. When it comes to pilots, by the way, Air Baltic, is in a very good position when it comes to female pilots. Air Baltic has female pilots, and there are young girls applying for pilot training, and in quite good numbers. The main challenge, of course, generally that we are facing is the aging of population, outward migration as well, or emigration, and we've generally have problems in our industry to get youngsters in pilot training. But on the positive note, everyone is enamored with pilot's profession. Everyone loves flying and tends to sort of glamorize flying and pilot's profession. But I've worked also with railway people, with bus drivers and with others, and there, it is difficult to get youngsters into the profession generally, not even to mention girls, because they are so keen to work with computers but not really keen to do anything else. I will nevertheless abuse my powers as the moderator. Madam Conning, you asked a nice question, but there's not an easy answer to that. I wonder how, out of those 40% ladies working at the Freeport Authority, what kind of positions do they have? Are those leading positions? I think that the transport sector, when it comes to sort of gender equality, it's a very difficult sector. And I remember my first time I went to Deutsche Bundesbahn, there were only 2 women and a sea of blue suits and grey hair, and it was striking for me as a lady. The sector itself is very male-dominated, which is frightening for any girl or woman. And what we have to make sure, be it the transport sector or any other sector, is how many women get to the management, to the various managerial positions. There should be gender quotas. That's my personal conviction. Otherwise, we'll not be able to get more women there. But me, with my experience and my background, I am, failing or struggling with finding managerial positions. So I don't know about young girls. And then there's also a question about people with specific engineering qualities and competence. We have a lot of women who are good in finances or good at finances, and how many of them would be active, say, working for the Freeport, with various tools and getting paid handsomely or quite well. That's another story. That's, of course, the question that goes out to the heads of those institutions and authorities, finding the right language or the right way to speak to those people. In IT sector, for example, it is also difficult to convince women why this is an attractive profession. and to convince any young women. And if there are any young or middle-aged women listening to me, you know, I should say that this is a very exciting sector once you're in there. But you have to understand that it is a very sort of masculine environment, and even more masculine than the other sectors like automobile industry. In automobile industry, you have less sort of masculine smell, if you will, compared to other sectors. But anyway, Kaspars will conclude a round of answers on this issue, and then I'll have a question. Just a short remark. Every year we are hosting the so-called Rail Baltic Global Forum, and this April, similar situation, but in panel we had 8 men, and the same question was asked, by the way, which inspired a sort of an informal movement internally in-house. Women in Rail is the title of this initiative, and one of the mothers of this initiative is also present here, and I think that we'll continue this initiative as well. Women in Rail, by the way, has been picked up by our British colleagues as well, actively promoted. Hello, it's Kras from the FICIL board and from the banking sector. A question about image and about investors, a question to Mr. Minister. When you fly in, when you land in Riga Airport, the first sort of thing that you see, or the first thing that the foreign investors see, is taxis. I know that you have made public comments and you've been quite vocal about the taxi problem, and I think that many of the people here are interested in the following question: when we will have nice taxis in the Riga airport, and when we will no longer have investors and those arriving being ripped off by taxis. Well, for many years I was on the board of the RIX, of the Riga International Airport, and I was actually involved in sort of institutional decision making, and how wrong decisions were made that led to this chaos with taxis at the Riga airport. That's why the first priority that I decided to focus on as I took the position of the Minister for Transport was to improve the legal framework for taxi services, and legislative initiative is currently in the second reading. Hopefully it will go through the third reading also before this convocation loses its mandate, and I hope that by the end of this summer we'll be able to change the legislation and improve the taxi services at the airport and the ferry port as well, to make those taxi service providers more accountable, and to also change the image and give clear rules of the game to the consumers, customers. Well, you see, the peculiarity of Latvia is that we have a very influential competition board which thinks that when it comes to taxi drivers, that there should be open competition and it can't be regulated or restricted by the airport as it is in other countries. So we have to therefore go all the long way. We have to start the lawmaking. We have to describe what kind of taxis are acceptable, the way that the drivers should look, and what the rates should be, and only then through legislative changes we can regulate this somehow. But the good news is that if everything goes well on 1st of September, we'll have everything set smoothly.
Moving from small things to big things, and as you like, so far we've been hearing quite a lot about pretty much how things are. But we do see also that the transport sector is quite a traditional kind of industrial sector. I come myself from the energy sector, so this is quite familiar water for me. That's also a very traditional, heavy asset kind of sector. We have the same issues around gender equality, which was also touched upon here. But what I would like to talk about now is the future. I mean, connecting the dots now in the transportation system, looking at it as an ecosystem as such. What are the innovations that we're going to implement now in the coming 10, or if you will, even 20 years? What's new on the horizon?
Anybody? Lūdzu, vai te kādam?
Anyone willing to answer, Mr. Minister? Probably no one of us knows really what the sector will look like in 10 or 20 years' time in terms of innovations. If we step back 10 or 20 years ago, let's remember those boxes of mobile phones that you had to carry around with you. And other electronic systems were really huge closets. What we as a state should do, we should promote integrated approach, intersectoral cooperation, openness to new ideas, to new technologies, and also the state enterprises with state capital should really be the role models, showing how to support all those different ideas, how to implement those ideas. However, if we compare our region with Germany, I would say that we are ahead. For example, in terms of phone connections, internet accessibility, quality of internet. So I don't think we should be worried too much about this. We just should continue being as active in implementing new ideas of being before. Mr. Linkaitis, if you had a vision of how, let's say, in 5-10 years ago, the transport sector should look like, and what kind of innovations would be implemented in an ideal world? What kind of situation would you see? What I would like to see with respect, for example, to passenger transport, I would like to see an integrated system, easy to use, convenient, safe, and also environment friendly. Thank you. The next question. I have a question by BAP in a board for FICIL board and digitalization group. What are the the next digitalization and innovation matters that you are getting ready to resolve in the transport field? And how all this would lead to united transport corridor where the passengers and the cargoes would not really hinder each other. Mr. Zeltinch, I was really wanting to get the mic, but now about this ideal transport world. In the ideal world, no one is taking anything anywhere. But as regards the digitalization, it's no longer a matter who would need what. We need this. We need this, and this is the present. In the port of Riga, this is one of our home assignments that we have already launched. And the plan is to complete it by the middle of the next year. We want to set up the so-called port community system. Well, essentially, that's nothing new. But that will definitely help everyone in the port and around the port, the companies and the clients and the stakeholders, to receive information and to share the information that is needed on a daily basis. It's not a secret that the port collects lots of information. However, what we are not doing, we are not really using this information as extensively as we could. So we have some kind of primary needs in terms of port management, but definitely also others in the port, those working in the port, need this information. So we would like to promote this. We would really be more active in this and to promote synergy and also increase our competitiveness. The mic is not. No, it's on. Well, the two last questions. Mobility as a service is based on openness of data. For the infrastructure managers and the users open their data for public use, and innovative companies, startups as integrators are developing apps that help a person get from A to Z to find the most effective mode of transportation. So this makes all the multimodal continuous service possible. That's for passengers. But in cargoes, we have to look at blockchain technologies and again processing of cargoes. So we need this kind of neutral tool. We have to digitalize documentation and auditing of documentation. And actually, this blockchain technology could enable better and more effective supply chain. So these two technologies will definitely play an important role. Well, about aviation. Aviation is a very conservative sector on the one hand, but on the other hand, it is very demanding towards technologies, and the future challenges in our sector will be the following. Where processes can be automatized, the employees will disappear, and this process has already started, and it's inevitable. And since the labor, the human resources are becoming more and more expensive, robotization will replace them. And the other point is, as regards cargo logistics, I can praise at this moment our cooperation with Customs Board of Latvia. We are very proud that we already now have an e-commerce deliveries from China, and we have this transit in Latvia, but we have both the wind and also the small windmill, and we have this added value here. But in general, we have far-reaching consequences to set up this one project, this one ecosystem. We see that also other logistics companies show interest in us, and we see this potential for growth. So automatization and also getting rid of all paper-based documents. I have the following question to all of you as the concluding one, like a question regarding the future. In the coming next in the 5 or 7 years, the EU has 3 main topics challenging for all. First of all, how to deal with climate catastrophe. Secondly, how aging of society. And number 3, technological revolutions. And this will also part of the digital committee. I would like to hear from you. Where do you see opportunity? How you could address or handle these 3 fields in your sector: climate, disaster, aging, and technologies. Mr. Kokars, and let's give all of you the floor now, and then we will conclude. This morning we had a discussion quite extensive on this matter, and I can say the following. Unfortunately, we are not ready to give up our comforts and convenience for the sake of environment, but we are ready to introduce ecologically effective solutions if they give us some kind of economic benefits. And in the case of airport, we can mention replacement of light bulbs to LED bulbs, and we saw return of investment quite soon because the electricity bill went down. And here you see this ecological excellence in some ways can be attained through this economic perspective, and the same could apply to using of transport system or heating system or any other systems. So that's about technology. Well, about climate change or impacts upon climate and all this. Within the EU, we have this magical process, discussion on internalization of external costs. Any form of transport has some kind of externalities, and different modes of transport are covering these externalities in different ways. Railway, usually by infrastructure fees, they somehow cover these externalities. And so this is less competitive than other forms of transport, like, for example, roads, which is not covering the externalities. Well, this one component is causing consequences for the rest of society, for example, by pollution and noise and impact on climate. Society somehow like at the expense of the public health, like we have the coal transportation, where societies, by public health or lack of climate sustainability, are subsidizing these forms of transportation. And that's why, looking at it in the context of railway cargoes, we are following this process very carefully. We believe that the rules of the game should be equal for all, and the advantages to those modes of transport that are beneficial for the climate should be obvious. Mr. Lunkert, well, environment and aging, this is external pressure that will make our companies find new special solutions and more effective solutions, and most appropriate for the particular situation. I can agree that railway is in fact the one which is already now paying for everything that it's doing. And in the future, apparently, the tax pressure might increase, or some other kind of pressure might be created with respect to road transportation, to fuels that are used in transport, and the companies will reckon with this. And they will have to look for better solutions. So my answer would be innovations. And Mr. Zeltinš, about aging, well, I will be trivial and simple. We have to multiply. Nothing else has been invented on this earth. As regards climate change, well, with regard to ports, we are an element of the transport chain. And technologies of fossil fuel, well, we will definitely see replaced, and gas probably will be an intermediate stage also on ships. Electricity is entering into all kinds of sectors, also ports and logistics, and also in the business of cargo handling, container terminals, and ships themselves. The third important thing would be transport as such. It should be made more efficient, decreasing the need for, I would say, for meaningless transportation, because I believe one of the major problems that we still have also with respect to maritime transport is transportation of empty air. And this is a challenge. This is a challenge with respect to transport technologies, so that we all crave consumer goods, and we also want to move around, but we should do this as efficiently as possible and only to the extent that is necessary. Of course, I'm speaking now about ideal world, but this is a challenge that we have to keep in mind. I thank you for your very pragmatic answers, but I can promise you that Greta Thunberg and all her followers would believe that your answers have been too simple. So we have to think more seriously about all these matters. But you mean the train? No, in general. But I will give now the floor to the very last speaker, and then we'll ask for a summary.
Norby, honorary chairman of FICIL, everyday life in banking. Would like to ask you, I think that the transportation sector is more or less one of the prime suspects when we look at corruption. And also in order to both when we talk about investments and also financing, and also in terms of investments in the sector and also in the operations. And what is your plan to improve the situation in your sector in order to be more attractive for investors?
Really good question. Liza Tua.
So, what I would like to ask you to do now is to think about the answer to this question, try to answer to this question, and try to make the last closing remarks on whatever was discussed today. And we'll start with Mr. Briskins. This is a very, very important issue. Mr. Minister, in his opening remarks, already talked about transparency and accountability, which is, of course, very closely linked with the corruption or anti-corruption measures and the overall reputation of the sector. However, similarly, very often, corruption or lack of transparency leads to the abuse of dominant position in the particular segment, and this is also something that which has recurrently been asked, with respect to Rail Baltic, and we know, what we are talking about, who's sort of lurking in the shadows, and who will come out of the sort of the closet whenever the right moment comes, in order to give us credit of trust to the industry and to the potential users. We have to make sure that the infrastructure is governed in an impartial and unbiased and sort of neutral way when it comes to Rail Baltic infrastructure. There is a high quality study that has been produced recently, and that will be a sort of a good basis for discussion amongst the countries that are now currently deciding on the future governance model for the Rail Baltica. However, from the sustainability point of view and from the investment point of view, investment into the stations, logistics, terminals and auxiliary industries and auxiliary areas in the urban environment, in the urban texture and so on and so forth, in order to make sure that this integration happens as efficiently as possible. The integration and the quality of the governance will be crucial, and we're already receiving signals that the investors might not come to those critical Baltic hubs if those hubs will be controlled by dominant players. Because to me, this is very much what will determine the future of Rail Baltic and will allow us to maximize the returns, or will probably, on that will depend our ability to maximize the returns here in the Baltics and in the Baltic Sea region. Yes, this indeed is a sort of a sore issue, and I am a TV viewer as well, and sometimes even the hair that I don't have on my head stands up. But the answer or the response to this is corporate governance, constant coordination between or with stakeholders. The more sort of closed off the governance is, the higher the corruption risks are, and open and transparent communication with the outside world is the way to clear those corruption risks. But individual accountability is, again, a very important issue. Individual responsibility for reputation risks as well. Everyone who's accused of the corruption is always saying that it's a political attack, but we don't see anything like that happening in Europe. So how so? And Mr. Zeltic, this is, for a port, has been an important issue, and we have done our homework. There have been improvements implemented by the port, but there's still a long way to go to prove that our system is corruption-free, that there's zero tolerance, that it's transparent and predictable and reliable as well. When it comes to port sector, there are a lot of players, there are a lot of stakeholders involved, so this is not only a problem for the Port Authority, but for the stevedoring companies, terminal operators, and so on and so forth. So this is about the sort of the hygiene of the sector, and tolerance or zero tolerance towards corruption among sectoral players. From a development point of view, our ability to efficiently tackle corruption will, to a large extent, determine our ability to lure in foreign investment and attract foreign investors. And the success of the companies will also depend on the corruption level. Of course, all the infrastructure projects involve huge costs. And in majority of cases, this is also concerns the port. There is a potential possibility, or those projects will involve some lending or bank loans. So banks are also very closely looking into those possible risks. So if port wants to develop, and ports do want to develop, then all the stakeholders, everyone will have to be able to prove or to show, demonstrate that they are transparent, future-oriented, focused, cost-efficient, and doing everything the best way possible. If we go beyond the ports into auxiliary areas, if we talk about the non-resident deposit assets and non-resident money, we are where we are geographically. Again, we will have to do business with, let's say, Russian nationals or the nationals of the eastern neighboring countries. We will not be able to sort of escape it or avoid it, but we have to put very close controls in place, and we have to control. But otherwise, if we will not be able to answer those simple questions as to how to register an account with the Latvian bank and what are the preconditions or the requirements for bringing in the capital, including from the east, will not be able to attract those investors. You were lucky that this is the last question, because I have no doubt that Madam Norby would specifically like to ask about the corruption in Riga and Ventspils port, and would ask about that. But very good answer, nevertheless. Mr. Linkite is the very last word. When it comes to corruption and anti-corruption measures, a lot will, you will hear a lot when it comes to our fight against corruption, and there will be a lot of cases. But you asked about the sort of the unique selling point of Latvia compared to other Baltic countries, or our competitive edge. I think that gradually, step by step, we're coming close to zero tolerance towards any shady deals or any corrupt relations, and the understanding of the business practices of business hygiene and anti-money laundering and tax evasion. I mean, there is a growing sort of understanding and awareness, and in this regard, we are sort of coming close to the way Nordic countries view it and treat it. When I took ministerial position, I was unfortunately forced to learn about a lot of unpleasant cases across transport companies, and this is not only about managers, really. Mid-level managers, low-level managers are not always acting fairly and responsibly and giving a level playing field. But this all depends on the management, on the corporate culture, corporate practices, internal controls, goals, and setting an example to your employees as well. What else can I add? Well, the more transparent our companies are, the more accountable they are, the better will the investment climate be for others who will potentially choose Latvia, and this is what our government is determined to do. Well, thank you. Thank you, first of all. I'd like to thank our viewers who are watching us live stream. Unfortunately, we went 10 minutes beyond time, but nevertheless, would like to thank everyone for patience and for bearing with us for a bit longer. I would like to specifically thank Mr. Zeltiņš, Kokars, Briškens, and Linkites. Let's give them a warm hand. Are there any further announcements? I think this concludes the discussion. Thank you all.